The Tibet, 4th Tibet Environment Conference 2023, organized by the Tibet Policy Institute and by the Central Tibetan Administration, co-hosting with the Chulalongkorn University. So we have the first session of today, and our first panel is on Indigenous knowledge and climate resilience. We have three versatile panelists here, and two of them are here, and one will be joining us virtually, and I'll be giving a brief introduction of them, but please kindly refer to our conference booklet for detailed introduction. So, the first one is Tsechu. She's the founder of the Mountain Resiliency Project to address the poverty and food insecurity prevalent in Himalayan communities. Her project work has proven track record and recognized by the Asian Society Young Leader, Skoll Foundation, and Forbes 30 Under 30. Dolma has worked as a project director for UNDP and US State Department project in Asia, Oceania, and Latin America. And then we have Dr. Chalump Oonariya. Dr. Chalump Oonariya, he's a scientist at the Thai Meteorological Department and is involved in the development of sub-seasonal to seasonal forecasting systems. His research interest lies in different topics related to climate change, and he has also established the national framework for climate services and that are particularly useful for agriculture, water resource management, and disaster preparedness. Then we have Pine Ponditis. Good morning. Can you see us? Okay. So Pine work focuses on mainland Southeast Asia's river water, the Mekong and Salween, and her focus has been particularly on Thailand's role as a dam developer and financer and intended market for their hydroelectricity. Before joining International Rivers in 2010, Pine spent 7 years working with the Thai NGO Living River Siam to empower riverine communities to protect their rivers. So this is a brief introduction, and please kindly refer to our conference booklet for more introduction. So now we will have 20 minutes for each of our panelists for the presentation, and I'll be giving a hint at 3 minutes, possibly to wrap up your presentation. And then after that, we will have 20 minutes for overall question and answer session. So the first presenter, we have Ms. Tsechu, Mountain Resiliency Project, Nepal, on harnessing traditional knowledge, climate change resilience in the Himalayan communities. Tsechu, please.
Thank you very much, Tenzin. Good morning. Can you hear me? Is this microphone working? Okay, perfect. So yeah, I wanted to speak about, so yesterday we had a long day with a lot of scientific knowledge and a lot of science-based data and information about what does climate change look like in the Himalayan communities. And then as the day progressed, there was a lot more interest and conversations from the crowd about how do we get more information from community-based knowledge groups, and how do we take advantage of this resource and take advantage of these networks to make more informed policy-based, community-based, traditional knowledge-based policy information. And I know there was a lot of conversation like from our researchers from Southeast Asia about how do we leverage community information, community networks to make better policies in places like Beijing, places like Bangkok, places like New Delhi. Like, how do we tap those networks and bring them to the decision-making tables? So in all honesty, every time we talk about traditional knowledge, like I know it comes in many forms. So the United Nations likes to call it indigenous knowledge. And the problem with indigenous knowledge is when you use the word indigenous, there's some kind of subsuming to the dominant culture. So with a lot of Tibetan communities, Tibetan Himalayan communities, some communities refrain from using the term indigenous knowledge because they feel like it subsumes their cause and movement into a more into the larger, the dominant power holders. So instead, if we call it traditional knowledge, then the focus is more on minus all the geopolitical issues. The focus is more on what the community has relied on for many generations, and how do we tap into this information and bring it to collaborating with modern technological advancements. So, no, that way. Yes. So with traditional environmental knowledge, tech as it's called, there's a lot of within South Asia, so with the Himalayan communities, the Andean communities in Latin America, the Alpine communities in Europe, the Aboriginal people in Oceania, there's a lot of information there about how our ancestors have dealt with very uncertain, vulnerable climate hazards in the past, and how have they adapted to such situations. And now our focus is taking that adaptation measures and using it to be building more resiliency from it. And so we looked into, this is the pointer? We looked into these 6 categories of institutional capital, rationing, forecasting, mobility, economic diversification, and communal pooling. The reason why we came up with these 6 groups were because there's a lot of conversations about traditional knowledge, but at the end of the day, when you lack frameworks about how to talk about these knowledge groups, if you do not combine it with what's already existing within social science research, then it sometimes excludes and alienates these knowledges from tapping into how policies and decisions are actually made. And when you look into institutional capital, so namely in Nepal and in northern India, we saw that with institutional capital. So institutional capitals are capitals that are either directly supported by the government, or they're directly supported by multilateral agencies and large funding groups. And we saw that there is a good amount of capital that's going in, but it is almost nothing compared to the large capital that's going into hydroelectric development, infrastructure development, and it's more of a addendum, or it's more of a footnote to these large multi-billion-dollar projects. And we found from our studies that from these institutional capitals, we want to ensure that traditional knowledge is not just an addendum or a footnote in these large grants, but that instead it becomes integral to how these decisions are made. And then with the rationing, this is about how can, there's large groups within Nepal, like we have a lot of indigenous groups, there's dozens and dozens of them. But then when it comes to the allocation of these resources to different groups, there's some communities that are prioritized over others, and then namely in Nepal, where we have the geographic distinction of mountains, the Himals, and then the second is the hills, the Pahads, and then the third is the plains, the Tarai. And when you have indigenous groups in all of these 3 geographical regions, their needs and their studies are very, very different. The climate change adaptation from the Tarai region, the plains, looks very, very different to what is being what has been intergenerationally practiced up in the mountains. So coming up with better ways to make sure that it's not a lump sum, it's not a lumping of all these traditional groups into one big category, but instead disaggregating disaggregating the data on different traditional groups and the different adaptation measures that each have taken. And then with forecasting, so with forecasting, this is very interesting because there's a lot of forecasting that goes on with the monsoon, the precipitation throughout the year, and the problem with forecasting is there's all this very, very, very sophisticated technology with forecasting, but the issue is the dissemination of that information. You need to make sure that the information is being disseminated in a way that is digestible for the farmers, because at the end of the day, the farmers are the ones who will need to benefit the most from this information, and they're at most at risk to the natural elements. So how do we combine forecasting with what has traditionally been known? You know, sometimes, like I run into a lot of farmers, and a lot of them joke about, how they can feel it in the bones when the monsoon's going to come early, or they can feel it in the bones when the frost is going to come early. And when we ask them questions about how do you know the frost is going to come early, they have all these telltale signs that their forefathers have passed down to them. So making sure that we combine not just science-based information, but using the science-based forecasting with the traditional forecasting. And then with mobility, in the Himalayan region, in Tibet, we've been practicing transhumanism for millennia. And with transhumanism, you know, there's a lot of mobility with the nomadic communities going from a summer pasture land to a winter pasture land and making the best use of the landscape through this. However, a lot of this mobility is disrupted today in Nepal, in India, in Tibet because of the border issues. And when the mobility is disrupted, the best practices that our forefathers have known about transhumanism, about the nomadic lifestyle, how to care for pastures, all of that gets disrupted. So how can we better inform, how can we better use, so like a lot of our research, there's not much solutions to it. It's a lot more like finding the gaps in the information and finding the gaps to where the resources need to be allocated. So in terms of mobility, you know, there's a lot of geopolitical issues that has interrupted the movement of nomadic people, but at the same time, how can you use, like, if there's such a concern with pastures and grasslands, how can we use information from nomadic communities to better inform policies on how land is used? And then with economic diversification and communal pooling, something else to mention about mobility. With mobility, there's a huge issue up in Nepal and northern India. There's a massive out-migration of young talent leaving the mountains because they're seeking a future elsewhere in urban areas or abroad. And with that comes with the demographic disruption. So if you look at the demographic, I don't have a chart here with the demographic distribution, but if you look at the demographic distribution of people up in the mountains right now, especially in Nepal, there is a huge, you almost see like a hourglass shape where there's a huge number of children that are very young, and then there's a huge number of people who are very old, because it's the old people taking care of the young babies. So it is an hourglass shape, and the middle part where all the talent and all the workforce actually is, that is missing from the mountains. So when you have this demographic, there is a lack of intergenerational dialogue and intergenerational exchange of information on how do we make sure that our ancestral knowledge gets passed down. So I don't have a solution for that in terms of how do we make sure people remain. But that is a very severe concern about mobility. And then with economic diversification and communal pooling is more about like how do we come up with community resources for informal networks of financing. So in Nepal, there's a huge Dukudi is a very, very common form of, it's a rotating savings network. And it works in a way where you bring a group of people together and you all pull your money together and you loan each other money. And at the end of the day, the interest is based on how quickly you get that capital and how late you take it. And variations of this form of Dukudi has been used throughout the mountain region. And it is a very much a communal self-help situation, but at the same time, it's also a great financing, like it's an expansion of financial inclusion in a region where it has been deeply lacking. And with economic diversification, when you have a lot of the young workforce moving out to the urban areas, there is huge numbers of there's a huge number of remittances coming back to the mountains. With the remittances, how do we tap into remittances and make sure that the remittance is not just a one-way street of young people sending money to the old people, but with more of a intergenerational dialogue of making sure that information and knowledge and the resources and the wealth of our the people, our elders, are being saved and tapped into. So, you know, with all these problems, like I feel like I shared a lot of problems about how all of this is not working in the favor of actually capturing traditional knowledge. At the end of the day, it's more about how can we integrate with climate change for improving better data availability and better policy. I haven't really found any good examples of how this is being implemented. So in Nepal, we have ICIMOD, the Integrated Center for, the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development. And even, like they're supposed to be the gold standard of what mountain development looks like in South Asia. And even with their work, there really hasn't been a policy informed by community knowledge. And it has been more of a, like something nice to have on your brochure, something nice to have on your website, but there hasn't been much about how do we actually, like how do we actually make better community informed decisions. So yeah, we've collected all of our information through, so even though mountain resiliency was more of a, it was more of an agri-based work, and it was a nonprofit that supports more of the agricultural farmers in the mountains. At the end of the day, we did a lot of data collection on how do we make sure that we're better supporting our farmers. And since COVID, we are no longer doing it, but before COVID, all of our information about how do we make sure that we're actually encapsulating these information and that we're categorizing them into these 6 groups so that we can ensure these frameworks can actually work a bit better. And then next we have, so with the future opportunities and threats, there is a lot of, within South Asia, there's a lot of, like this is an untapped market of what, you know, like up in the mountains, there's a lot of wealth, right? There's a lot of natural beauty, natural wealth, and there hasn't been proper mechanisms on how do we protect the intellectual property rights of what our like what our elders know. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with how intellectual property works, but it's a legal framework. It's a legal right that's given to a person, so a natural person or a corporation, on how their knowledge, how their intellect can be protected so that they have exclusive rights over the use of their creation. So for example, in India, the neem plant, I don't know the scientific word for neem, but the neem plant, the government of India has protected the intellectual rights of the neem plant. So you cannot just be, I don't know, like you cannot be Sephora or like a different, like a beauty shop, and you cannot capitalize on neem because it has the protection of the government, so that it has to be a product from India, it has to be authorized from an Indian business to ensure that it's an actual neem plant and that you cannot monetize on the benefits of this superpower plant. So similarly, we need better protection of IP rights within the Himalayan region. Specifically with Tibetan medicine, we have there's like an immense wealth of information and resources about how ethnobotany works within Tibetan medicine. And there hasn't really been any sort of, protection over how do we make sure that we're protecting our native seeds? How do we make sure we're protecting our indigenous knowledge on how the body works, how the mind works, how do we capitalize it, but how do we capitalize it in a way that also makes sure that it does not further exacerbate disenfranchisement or disempowerment of economic development. So I think this is a really good opportunity and a threat in the future about how do we ensure that there's a lot of information about traditional knowledge in the mountains, but how do we make sure that we do better IP rights for protecting that? And right now, the policymakers and the business people may not think that it's very lucrative, but I think very soon that there will be a lot more Westerners or people from developed countries coming to take advantage of these information. So thank you.
Thank you, Tshula, for very interesting presentation, highlighting the importance of traditional environmental knowledge and also different adaptation strategies. Thank you. Then we have our second speaker, Dr. Chalump Oonariya from Thailand Meteorological Department. So the topic of the presentation is the impact of Tibetan Plateau on the onset of Southeast Asian summer monsoon. Dr. please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really honored to be here to talk about this topic. It's really first time in mine. And today I will talk about the link between the Tibetan Plateau to the monsoon system in our region. I myself will talk about in the meteorologist perspective of the thing. So that probably most of you know about the geographic feature is really important to develop the formation of the rainfall. So Tibetan Plateau is really important in our region because of this can influence to the monsoon system and also for ITCC, the intertropical convergence zone is really important to bring the most of the water in the season. Come to the very first question of the scientific should be at this. Most of the time when we talk about in the past or 10 years ago, we think about the climate change, the global warming, this brings us to have like the frequency of the extreme event in terms of our weather and climate. And also we have the duration of the event is probably longer or shorter. And this one is show you the region linked to the Tibetan, Plateau, and Indochina Peninsula. We have a lot of the driver over this region and probably influence to the season. What is the importance of the seasonal in our? Because of the seasonal bring us is not only the rainfall distribution and also the temperature is really important to the farmer to bring the water to make the crop planting. We have a lot of the extreme event involved in our regions. It start from the heat wave. 10 years ago, we have a lot of the heat wave event. It's not only from the Indian and also in Thailand and Indochina Peninsula as well. We have the very frequently of the drought impact. It's not only from the deficit of the rainfall, but also from the water management as well. And also we have the flooding from very short, heavy and severe rainfall for the short time. For example, if you take a look at the data for a specific province like Phuket past year, we have like over 150 millimeter per day in Phuket, most of the time. Not the flooding at all. But when we come to the last year, we have the same amount of rainfall, but very short of time, probably 2 hours. So we got the very the severe or like a landslide and flooding in Phuket. Yeah. So in our region, we have many drivers. It's not only the influence from Tibetan Plateau, but we have a lot of, in our meteorologist perspective, we can take a look at line by line from, we have like the seasonal over here. In Thailand, we have the first seasonal onset on May, and the seasonal moved to the north in June and July, and go to the South China, and move back to the south in October, and this November and December as well. It's being the rainfall. So another impact should be at this is the tropical cyclone from the Pacific Ocean, and also El Niño La Niña is the big impact to our region. And another size of the Indian Ocean is will be our Indian Ocean dipole is bring the dry mass or the moist mass to our region. Also because of this region located in the equator, so we have a lot of phenomena like the equatorial wave. You may probably know about the Mendelian oscillation and the Kelvin wave and a lot of the wave that influence to the season. This one is show you the amount of rainfall come from the intertropical convergence zone. We call this one ITCC. This one is taken from the data from 1981 to 2010. That you can see month by month we can have like the ITCC oscillation that's bring the amount of rainfall to our region. For example, in the November, it should have the rainfall to the south of Thailand. It's not to the upper Thailand. So this one I stop the screenshot and take a look what is going on for the ITCC lie on the southern part in Jan and on the northern part in July. You can take a look at the wind that's flow from the north and the south, and will be get like the ITCC along the equatorial. we try to find the model to figure out what is going on if we have to make a forecast, the prediction for the next season or probably next year or the next decade. We use like the climate model that probably most of you know when we think about the climate change. We want to take a look, make an outlook for the next decade or 2 decades by using the information or data that we have. And we try to make the model to make the projection for the impact and for the mitigation or even like the adaptation as well. This one is show you the Tibetan should be impact to the onset of our region. For Thailand, we can have like the swing of the onset date start from probably 21st, 25th of May until June, the 1st of June, and so on. This one is our analysis of our geographic in the Indochina, and you can see this one. It show you is probably the onset date is in individual station. Like Thailand is really narrow and long to the longitude, so you can have the difference of the onset. This one is taken from the data set and also from the end date, the withdrawal of the monsoon. This map, this graph is very important to make a planning. Show you the rainfall distribution. It starts from the 1st of Jan and until the 21st of December. You can see what is going on if you want to use the water for agriculture, for water management. You can have that. This one is the pre-monsoon that can bring you the small amount of rainfall. Is very important to the farmer to make the seeding. If you have, if you understand the pattern, you can make the planning for your activity. And also, you will expect to get like the onset exactly at time, but some specific year. For example, in this year, we have the delay of the monsoon season, probably 1 month ahead. Is the impact to the farmer as well. So if you take a look at this one, in our region, it's not only the smooth of the distribution, but also we have the break of the monsoon, the break of the rainfall. By if we looking at the driver, we can have like the El Nino La Nina, we can have like the ocean dipole, even we can have like the Tibetan Plateau in front. So we can have this one. It's really important as well because this one is dry spell. We have very short of time in the season that no water. For example, if you're sitting over here and you expect to get the water from the sky, you don't have. It's really important to bring the water from the river, very long distance. I go to the farmer in Chulalongkorn. They don't have the water in this time, and the farmer talk about is very difficult to bring the water from the from the river. Is have to make the cost of the oil, the gas station. So, in scientific work, we try to figure out this, try to looking at different patterns we can. This one, the gray scale, it show you the normal pattern of rainfall distribution, but some specific location that you can see. Even in Thailand, we have the station along this valley, along the mountain. It will be another feature, another characteristic. If you take a look at this one along the coastal line, it will be the different pattern of the rainfall distribution. This one is really important to make the planning, to make the water management. This one we call the clustering analysis by utilize the mathematical technique and break apart the several stations, several locations in this several way. This one is show you another pattern. What is the going on for the rainfall distribution? If you come up with, this one is every 5 days of the calculation, you can have like a 73 for X, approximately of the data. You can have this one is the first peak of the monsoon. You can have the very large amount of rainfall, and you can break by the climate diver. This one we call this one the climate monsoon breaking. And also we have the second peak of the rainfall. So if you take a look at the first one, this one as we call this one the first peak, you can have the rainfall from this one. This one we call the trough, this being the moist air over here, and this one is the dry air over here. And the second one, the CMB, we call this one. Okay, this one you bring the moist air over here and dry air over here. So this one is the same thing with a specific event. You can have the very small of the rainfall over here, CMB. Okay, this one is show you some graphic for CMB. We have here very small of rainfall over here. Okay, this one the event that we found in 2021. Yeah, that you can see we have very small of the dry spell that's bring the damage of the farming. For example, in the June and also the second one in the July. You can see this one, the ICCZ break by the Tibetan Plateau and also from the high pressure in the Pacific. You can have very small amount of rainfall over Thailand. So the conclusion will be in terms of the atmospheric condition, we think about the influence of the surrounding around is not only the oceanic, atmospheric, and also the geographical feature is really important to bring the decreasing of rainfall and enhancing of rainfall. And also the ICCZ will be break by the system. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chalump, for highlighting the importance of Tibetan Plateau on the southeast summer monsoon season. Now we have our